In today's video, we're going to take a little look at how you breathe and how that impacts your intra-abdominal pressure, which is the pressure within your abdominal cavity. So let's start off by just analyzing your breathing patterns as they stand at the moment. I want you to close your eyes, get comfortable for a moment, and just try to tune into your body. Breathing in through your nose for 2 seconds and then breathing out through your mouth for 4 seconds. I want you to pay attention to what happens first on your inhalation. So you're going to inhale through your nose, and then I want you to feel and pay attention to the path that air is traveling within your body. What do you feel happening once it leaves the top of your nasal cavity, through the back of the throat? It's going to get to your chest. Feel your chest with your hand. How much is that moving? Then take your hands and put them on the sides of your rib cage, and on your next inhale, feel what your rib cage is doing, if anything. It's okay if you're feeling nothing in some of these areas, just take note of that. Then place your hands on your abdomen. On your next inhale, what do you feel your tummy doing? Is it rising? Does it feel tense? Does it feel relaxed? What do the sides of your tummy do? So on your waist when you breathe in. And then finally, what does your pelvic floor do? On your next inhale, think of your pelvic floor. Which way is it moving? Can you even feel it? And is it moving at all? Now, paying attention to your exhale. As you exhale, starting with the pelvic floor, can you feel it? Yes or no? If you feel it, which way is it moving on your exhalation? And how much movement can you feel? Then to your belly. When you exhale, what does your tummy feel like? Is it falling? Is it clenching? Is there any pain or tension? And your sides as well. Take a little check there on your exhale. And then your rib cage. When you exhale, do you feel movement through your rib cage? And then lastly, through your chest. So take a mental note of what you could feel with your own breathing patterns as they were before I started telling you how you should breathe and what intra-abdominal pressure is and how that affects you, because this is most likely how you're breathing throughout the day on a day-to-day basis. Once I start talking about breathing and saying what's the right and wrong way to breathe, you're probably going to just mimic those patterns, but it won't last for long. So however your breathing was a minute ago is most likely what your breathing is like on a day-to-day basis. So let's first take a little look at your inhalation. So we have let's look at your core first. So we've got your diaphragm up the top, which is your main breathing muscle. And then we have your pelvic floor diaphragm down the bottom. We'll just call it your pelvic floor. But these are two diaphragms. As you can see by the shape, they are the top and the bottom of what we call your core canister. So if you think of this like a can, that is the lid, that is the base of your can. Then we have the back of your can, which is the multifidus, which is the muscles around your spine. And then we have that big, beautiful muscle which wraps right around from your spine through the tummy and then back around. The fibers of that muscle run horizontally and it's separated in the middle by that connective tissue, which stretches through pregnancy. So what happens when we inhale is our diaphragm is going to contract to pull air down into our lungs. Our pelvic floor, ideally, and this is not what happens in everyone, this is the ideal movement patterns. When your diaphragm contracts and it pulls air down into your lungs, your respiratory diaphragm and your pelvic diaphragm will mimic each other in movement. So it's going to contract and pull air into your lungs. While this is contracting, this muscle is going to relax down away from the body. Then on your exhalation, as your respiratory diaphragm relaxes up, your pelvic floor will contract and lift. So those two diaphragms move synergistically with every inhale and exhale, ideally. Then with your belly, as you breathe in, your belly will expand outwards and you'll have a little bit of pressure and expansion backwards this way as well, right around your tummy. Then as you exhale, your tummy will draw in along with the pelvic floor and your air will be expelled by these muscles compressing and this muscle relaxing. The air will be pushed out of your lungs. So this is a happy core. This core's functioning really well. They don't need to do too much to have a nice functioning system. This muscle is going to be nice and healthy because every inhale and every exhale, it's doing what it should. Same with the pelvic floor. This is not taking exercise into account, because as soon as you take poor exercise habits into account, then this could go all out the window. And then generally what you'd see is this movement pattern would not be ideal and great in someone who doesn't exercise and train their core efficiently. Because if one of these muscles is tight or dysfunctional, you won't be able to have this movement pattern, and then a host of other issues will start to go wrong. So let's take a look at some of the most common things or breathing patterns that people have which will mess with this beautiful respiratory system. And the first one is breathing too shallow through the chest. These people usually breathe through their mouth, and they're usually very highly strung, stressed out, busy people. They find it hard to relax because they're not using their diaphragm muscle. And then when you don't use your diaphragm muscle, because remember these two should ideally mimic each other, this muscle doesn't get used as often also. And a good muscle is one that is able to both relax and contract. If you're not using this diaphragm muscle because you're breathing so shallow into the chest, this muscle will start to get tighter over time. Then this muscle will follow suit and start to get tighter over time as well. Or if you're breathing so shallow through the chest and you're not getting movement through that pelvic floor, the pelvic floor might initiate with a lack of movement, it's going to start to get tight over time. And if this muscle gets tight, guess what happens? This muscle starts to get tight too. So you can start to see how these two work together as a team. But they also need the help of the abdominal muscles to work in the right order for these muscles to do what they need to do. So let's take a look at this abdominal muscle here, and what some people do is draw or squeeze, especially women, they squeeze their tummy all of the time to make it look flatter, make it look tighter. But then that's going to inhibit movement and the natural relax and contract of this beautiful muscle that we need in order for this muscle to be nice and strong and functional. So if you're constantly squeezing into your tummy, the pressure inside the abdomen has to go somewhere. It's going to take the path of least resistance. You're forcing resistance by contracting this muscle all of the time. So it's going to take the path down low. There's not that much to stop. I mean, there's no big bony structure right at the base of your pelvis, which is going to stop the musculature from being pushed down. And then over time, this can create pelvic organ prolapse and pelvic floor dysfunction and pelvic floor weakness as well. Another thing that can happen is people are pushing the air out from the top of their abdominal muscles, but they're not really using this big muscle here. So they're trying to use this muscle on the top, which is going to create weakness in this muscle here. And then over time, with pressure, in terms of the intra-abdominal pressure management, again, it's just going to be pushed down, but it might be pushing out and down instead of just down on the pelvic floor. Because if you don't have the strength in this muscle to use it, it's just going to use the rectus abdominal muscle, which is not going to be good for your abdominals. This muscle is going to get weaker over time. It's going to leave you open for back injuries, and you're going to find it hard to close any sort of diastasis or create a flat stomach. So if we take a little look at a balloon here and think of this as your abdomen. So as we breathe in through the diaphragm, contracting from the top, that's going to lessen the space inside your abdomen because the diaphragm is pulling down. It's going to create pressure inside your abdomen, and that pressure needs to go somewhere. So if we have that pressure evenly dispersed, it's going to just nicely press gently against those muscles there. That muscle is going to relax. This muscle here is going to relax. It's going to allow for that expansion. If we have tightness in this muscle down here in the pelvic floor, and it's not allowing for much expansion down there, that expansion is going to start to push out the front. Again, not great for your core. Let's look at if you're just using your core muscles, but you're not using your pelvic floor. If you're squeezing when you exhale, for example, through the abdominals, but you're not lifting your pelvic floor on that exhalation, again, that pressure, look at the pelvic floor, what's happening? You're squeezing the air out, but you're not lifting your pelvic floor. That pressure is going down on your pelvic floor still. The air is coming out, but you still have mismanaged pressure. So we want our core to be able to work synergistically together in order for our pressure to be managed safely. What happens when you don't manage pressure safely is you either get issues with your abdominal wall, you get issues with your pelvic floor, or you get back injuries. So it's a little bit to think about, but if your breathing mechanics and your breathing patterns are off, then your intra-abdominal pressure is off instantly. When you're exercising in particular, if you, for example, are doing a squat, when you go to stand up from your squat, you are fighting forces and you are exhaling, ideally, as you're coming up from the top of your squat. Your core is able to contract when you're exhaling. If you are trying to inhale when you're going up against those forces, your core's not going to contract. You're leaving that space of your torso completely open to take the force of that load without stability between here and here. Because intra-abdominal pressure, managing it safely, if once it's managed, it creates stability through your torso from here to here. That's going to protect your back and protect your spinal discs from injury while you're training. If you are trying to get a nice strong pelvic floor, then you need to make sure that when you are Kegling, you initiate your Kegel with an exhale, because it's just the same scenario as that squat. As you exhale, we want to train your pelvic floor muscles and your respiratory system to work synergistically. As you exhale, your pelvic floor will lift. Then the next step is to contract your transverse abdominals, and then your pelvic floor and your abdominals will work nicely as one unit. We don't want one to work without the other, or we start to get mismanaged pressure. So if your goal is to try to get a nice flat stomach, good for you. But if you don't have a bigger picture on taking into account your breathing mechanics and your posture, then you're going to struggle to achieve that goal. So while breathing mechanics might not be something that's seemingly important to someone, if you have any sort of aesthetic goals, you need to make that a priority. And in terms of your health, if you have poor breathing patterns, then that's going to leave you with a host of health issues as well. So again, just back to the diaphragm muscle, which is up here. If your diaphragm is tight, it's going to start constricting on a couple of major nerves. One is the vagus nerve and one is the phrenic nerve. So the vagus nerve is responsible for helping you to relax and rest and digest and bring your stress levels down. It's going to allow you to It's going to allow the adaptations from any exercise you've done to occur safely so that you can go ahead and rinse and repeat for the next day without becoming overworked and overwhelmed. If you can't activate your vagus nerve, then you constantly start to stay more in a flight or fight response. So this is going to leave you more highly strung, more stressed out. Your breathing is generally higher up into the chest. It's faster, it's shallow. You don't get that time to reset not only your brain but your body from what's happened to you through that day. And then you carry that stress into the following day and the following day and the following day. And you can see how over time this can become quite an issue. The other nerve is the phrenic nerve. So the phrenic nerve, if that's compressed and if that's too tight, that can cause a whole lot of tightness through your neck and shoulders. So people who are always tight and sore up here, that could be because your diaphragm is tight. It could also be that your diaphragm is getting tight because you've got poor posture from your desk, and these muscles are tight and they're constricting on the phrenic nerve, which can then make the diaphragm tight. So you can see how everything's really connected. And then once your diaphragm's tight, what does your pelvic floor do? So everything starts to get thrown off. So everything needs to be working in order for you to get the best results possible. If you suffer from reflux, then you might have issues with your diaphragm being tight anyway. And then obviously with pelvic floor health, anything to do with trying to create a strong pelvic floor, you must have good breathing mechanics. And the more you think about your breathing on a day-to-day basis, the more you will start to understand your breath and how it affects your body. If you start to focus on it more just in chunks during the day, then when you're not thinking about it, your breathing mechanics should be a little bit more optimal. As you can see, I've been talking a lot through this time, so that's going to inhibit me from being able to use my nose and using my diaphragm muscle. I already feel a little bit more stressed out, but if I was to stop right here and lie down, close my mouth, and just use my nose and slow my breathing down, I'm going to start to become more relaxed as time goes on. And that's going to have a powerful impact on my body. I will switch from this work mode, which is an area of my body which is connected to that fight or flight, I can never say that, part of your nervous system, and I will switch more into my rest and digest system. And that's where you want to be, especially if you're trying to go to sleep. So this is just a brief overview, but you will hear a little bit more about it when we go through how to contract your core, which will be in the next recorded video. And anything a little bit more technical to do with breathing on gas exchanges won't be done in this video as well. It's too much. So your homework for this week is to try to just analyze your breathing mechanics on a day-to-day basis several times through the day and try to get more of a natural breathing rhythm. As you inhale, diaphragm opens, ribcage opens and diaphragm contracts. Your pelvic floor and your tummy will expand out and away, and then as you exhale, your pelvic floor lifts, your tummy falls, your ribcage falls back together, and rinse and repeat. You need to have nailed this before we go through how to contract your core, or you'll find it hard to contract your core correctly. But that's your homework for now, and I will see you next time.